Hello everyone and welcome to my video on quadratic equations. So to begin with, what is a quadratic equation? Well, I have several examples on the screen here, starting in the top left. So we have x squared is equal to 9. And you notice that the highest power, that is the number above the x, is 2. And that's what makes it a quadratic equation. You want the highest number above the x, the power, to be 2. Now, how do we actually solve these quadratic equations? Well, there are a few methods, and I'm going to be detailing one of them in this video and others in later videos. To begin with, let's look at this very simple one in the top left, x squared equals 9. This one is fairly easy to solve because we can take square roots. So if you remember, the square root of a number is another number that you multiply by itself to get that number. So for instance, the square root of 4 is 2, because 2 times 2 is 4. So if we do that here, we get the square root. We want to take the square root of both sides. My sloppily drawn square root there. And that will then reduce to x is equal, and the square root of 9 is 3. However, there is a little catch here. There is actually another solution, and that is minus 3 as well. So we have plus or minus 3, so this means 3 and minus 3 are solutions. And the reason minus 3 is also a solution is because if you do minus 3 times minus 3, you also get 9, because negative times negative is positive, and 3 times 3 is 9, so you still get 9. So there are two solutions. So already you see that these quadratic equations are kind of strange. There's two solutions, not just one solution. So there will be two. So I hope that one makes sense. You may want to revise square roots of numbers and things, and negative times negative. But let's move on to the general quadratic equation here. So this gives us x squared plus 3x plus 2 is equal to 0. So we're looking at the middle section now. Now this is much more complicated than our previous example. How on earth do we solve this? Well, the method we're going to look at is factorizing the quadratic equation. And what do I mean by factorizing? Well, I mean we want to write this equation in a different form. And the form we want to write it in is we want to write it as a bracket, and then we'll have an x, and then we want to do plus, and we want to have some number here. I'll leave it blank for the moment. So we want to have some number here, and we want to have a closed bracket, and then we want to do another bracket, and then we have another x, and then we have plus some other number. Okay, so what we're trying to do is we're trying to write it as one bracket times another bracket, and we want this to be the same as this. So you can see that when we multiply these out, regardless of what we will put some number in here, but when we multiply these out, we're going to get an x squared, because we'll get an x times the x over here, which will give us the x squared that we want. So that's good to start with, but what numbers do we put in the space? Well, what we want to look for is, I'll explain to you the method, and then I'll show you why it works. So what we want to look for is numbers that multiply to give the number here. So we want to look for numbers that multiply to give 2, but we also want numbers that multiply to give 3, not multiply to give 3, sorry, add to give 3. So numbers that multiply to give 2, and numbers that add to give 3. So what numbers multiply to give 2? Well, 1 and 2 multiply to give 2, and 1 and 2 also add to give 3. So that seems like it would be a good choice. So let's try that. So let's do 1 and 2. And you can see that this will work, because when we multiply this out, we get x squared. We get x squared. So that's this x multiplied with this x. Then we'll also get a 2x, so we'll get a plus a 2x. Oh gosh, that's a big drawn 2, isn't it? Don't write like me, make sure your handwriting is neater than me. So we get a plus 2x, and then here we get plus an x, get plus an x, plus an x. And then finally, with the 1 and the 2, we get the plus the 2 that we need, the plus 2. And then this 2x and the x give us the 3x. So you can see that this works. So all you want to do is look at the number on the end, and you want to find numbers that multiply to give that number, and you also want those same numbers to add to give the number in front of the x here, which in this case was 3. I hope that makes sense. I've got 2 practice questions for you to try, so just have a go at them. One is going to be exactly the same as what we did over here, just with different numbers. And then number 2, so on the right hand side here, number 2, is a little bit trickier, so you may have to think about this one, but I'm going to go through them anyway. So I'll give you a moment to pause the video and then come back when you're ready to see the solution. Okay, hope you're ready to see the solution to these equations. So we'll start with number 1. We have x squared plus 8x plus 7 is equal to 0. And we want to factorize this equation here. So we start off with our brackets, with our x and our plus. Now, what number do we want? Well, 7. We want to get 7. What numbers multiply to give 7? Well, let me see. I mean, 2 and 4 don't work, because that gives 8. So maybe 1 and 7, that would work. 1 and 7 would work. And oh, look, 1 and 7 also add to give 8. So that seems like a very good try indeed. So let's try 1 and 7. So we've got x plus 1. And it obviously doesn't matter which order you put the numbers in the brackets in this case, because it's the same whichever way around. And then we have x plus 7. Okay. And we can check that this will work. We'll get x squared plus 7x plus x. That's 8x, that's good. And then plus 7, and that's what we want. So we get exactly what we want. So that's that one factorized. Now, what about this one down here? This is a bit strange. Number 2 is a bit strange. We've got a 2x squared. I mean, the rest of it looks fairly normal. We've seen that before, but now we've got a 2x squared. And how do we deal with this 2x squared? Well, I hope you can see this time that just an x won't be sufficient. So we can't do our bracket and just write an x after the bracket, because if we do that, we're only going to get an x squared. We'll only get 1x squared when we need 2x squared. So in this case, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to do a 2x in one of the brackets, okay? That may seem straightforward to some of you, but it can be a little bit confusing the first time you see it. So you need a 2x this time. So essentially what you're looking for is you're looking to get this x squared term out, and you need to get the 2x squared in this case. So if you have an x squared by itself, as in number 1, then it's fine just to have an x in both brackets. But if you've got a 2x squared or a 3x squared, then you're going to need another number here. You may have to play around with it to see which number works. But 2x, so start with 2x in this case. Now, what numbers do we put? Well, we can put a plus. We can put a plus here, or we can put a plus here, and then we'll put our closed bracket just to make it easy, and then we'll have our x here. Okay, so we can see that this 2x and this x will multiply to give us a 2x squared, so that's fine. And then we need a plus, and then our closed bracket. So what numbers do we want? Well, let's try the same approach as we did before, shall we? We wanted numbers that multiply to give the in this case, we used the 7 before, didn't we? So we wanted numbers that multiply to give the 7. In this case, we've got -2 here. You see, it's a minus right there. So we got -2. So what numbers multiply to give -2? Well, we could try -2 and 1, or -1 and 2, perhaps. Let's try -1 and 2. Let's try -1 and 2, shall we? So let's do -1 here, and then plus 2. Well, that certainly gives us a -2. But hang on, you might be asking, they don't add to give 3, do they? 2 plus -1 is just 1. And that doesn't give 3. And before we said, it had to add to give the number in front of the x. Well, in this case, it doesn't have to add to give the number in front of the x because we've got the 2. Because we've got the 2 here. Because this 2 is going to multiply with this number here. You see? So that's going to give us extra. Before we only had the x multiplying and not the 2. We didn't have the factor of 2 here. So in this case, because of this extra 2, we don't need them to add to give this. Instead, what we want is we're going to get a 2 times this number. So a 2 and a 2 will give us a 4. And then we'll get a minus a 1 lot of x. So in this case, we need twice this number minus this number to add to give us the 3. So you can see what we'd get out of that is a 4x. 4x, if I can draw that 4. A 4x, and then we get, I'll write it as a plus to make it clear to you, but we get plus minus 1 lot of x. So we need twice this number minus this number, or plus this number if it was a plus, but it's a minus, so minus this number here to give us the 3x. Okay? So that's that one factorized. 2x plus minus 1 and x plus 2. And you can just write that, put that down below as 2x minus 1. So you don't need to say plus minus 1, you just write minus 1. But you can write, when you're working out, you can write plus minus 1 if that makes it easier for you to understand it when you work it out. And then running out of space here, but we'll put an x, a tiny little x in the corner there, and then x plus our number 2. There we go. So I hope that makes sense, this explanation. It's a bit of a tricky topic, but just practice it a few times. Maybe go through your textbook and see if they have any questions for you to try. And just go through lots of examples. That's the best way to learn it. So just remember the simple rules. If you've got just an x squared, if you've got just the x squared, then you want numbers that multiply to give you your number on its own at the end. So maybe the 7 in question 1. And they need to add to give the number in front of the x. But if you've got the 2x squared, so if you've got the 2x squared over here, then you want you're going to need another factor in front of the x. You might need a 2x, and you still want them to multiply to give you your number here. But this number here will be slightly different. You'll need, depending on what number you put in the bracket, depending on what number you put there, you'll need something different. So the best way to work it out is just to write it down and try different numbers and multiply it out and see what you get, and then you can see what you've done wrong and how you need to correct it. But it's usually fairly obvious. So the good one to try is just try that number. Just go for it, the first try, just try that too. Put it in there. And if that doesn't work, then maybe try other numbers that multiply to give 2. So if you've got, let me write it down here for you. If you've got a 4, maybe you had a 4x squared, then, and you'd already tried 4, and that hadn't worked, then you might want to try a 2 2x and another 2x, because you see the 2x's will multiply to give you the 4x squared, so you might want to try that instead. So just have a play around with it when you're working them out. But these are a little bit harder. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed. Hope it helped. Leave a like and a comment if you found it helpful, or tell me if you didn't find it helpful at all, what I could do to improve. I'll be uploading some more videos soon about other methods for solving these quadratic equations, which you may find easier than factorizing. So I'll see you in the next video, guys. Take care and enjoy doing the maths.